I think part of the motivation is that I did so much, having resisted getting proper outside psychiatric help. I went through so many difficult exercises with my psychiatrist, which definitely helped me. And I just thought, well, why don't I share these? And, rather than people have to go and see somebody, they can just dip in and get them for themselves. And I think I've always had a fascination for mental health, probably born of the fact that my brother had schizophrenia. My older brother had schizophrenia. That was a very, very big thing in my life and the whole family's life. And I saw him and how he had to change his life and adapt it and deal with it, and actually deal with it pretty well. I had suicide in the family, a very close cousin of mine who killed himself. I've got a son who's a recovering alcoholic. I had all these this stuff going on. And I just want people to know that there's nothing wrong with any of it. It just is. I hate the phrase "it is what it is" when we talk about COVID, because I feel more could be done. But, mental health, we all have it. We all have it. And I just feel that the stigma and the taboo around mental illness, which has grown up over the centuries in the way that man has kind of developed, I just feel it's got to go. And I actually think it will go. I just wish it wasn't taking quite as long. I was always wanting to do the job to the best of my ability, and most of the time I think did it pretty well. But when I felt, for whatever reason, I couldn't quite get up to the level of performance and work ethic that I needed, I would tell my deputy, or I would tell my secretary, I would call somebody in and say, listen, I'm meant to be doing this, do you mind doing it for me? And, I think having that network, and again, I think that I built up an incredibly strong team who were and remain unbelievably loyal to me. I'm very proud of that. Lots of people have slagged me off in my life, but none of them ever are the people who work for me. And that was very much, I think, driven in part by my openness, because it also meant that they could be open. They felt empowered to be able to say, I'm really struggling, or I'm finding this too hard, or I maybe need to take some time off. And I think that, once you've got that culture, it's an incredibly empowering thing. So we had this idea with the publisher. I did these interviews with public figures. So I did Nicola Sturgeon, David Lammy, Gary Lineker, Jeff Stelling, Maro Itoje, the rugby player, Kelly Holmes, Deborah Meaden, Josh Widdicombe. We've got really good people. And I started them all by asking the same question, which is, how are you? Which, of course, is what we all ask each other when we sort of bump into each other at work and what have you. But it's taken on a completely different sort of significance. And if you'd have asked me to write down, before I did the interview, they're all with people that I know already personally. If you'd have asked me to write down how I thought they would be responding and reacting in lockdown, I got them all wrong. Every single one of them. I'd have said Gary Lineker, absolutely sailing through it, calm as you like. It won't be worrying him. He was really, I think, struggling. Jeff Stelling, Sky Sports, who's like Mr. Positive, Mr. Energy, Mr. Motivator. His straight answer when I said, how are you? He said, you know what, Alastair? He said, I'm really struggling. I'm finding this so hard. I can't get out of bed in the morning. Nicola Sturgeon said she was finding it really difficult doing those briefings every day and talking about death. She was finding it really difficult. David Lammy actually admitted that he, in a couple of times in his past, actually, I'm falling into a trap there. I shouldn't say admitted. He told me something I didn't know, that he'd actually had two spells of treatment for depression in the past, and he was worried it was happening again. So, it was really, really interesting. And David Harewood, the actor, he said something interesting. He said, this is the first thing I can think of that's ever happened in my lifetime, he said. But then I thought, I wonder if there's anything that's ever happened in history where every single person on the planet is worrying about the same thing. Everybody on the planet's been affected by this, and we know we've been affected by it. I don't think anything's happened like that before. The area that's really been interesting from my perspective in the last few years, since the financial crisis, is the banking sector and the financial services sector. I think they really have decided collectively that they need to take a different approach. And I think that when the crash was on, I think an awful lot of the banks had suicides. They had their staff literally jumping out of buildings. And I did a thing for the Time to Change campaign, which was a brilliant campaign, anti-stigma campaign. But the stock exchange asked us to go and open the stock exchange one day because they wanted to do a big mental health thing. And the reason for that was that one of their people had killed himself. And they've actually, I don't know whether it's still the case, but at the time they'd not touched his desk. And it's as you walk into the first floor, the main floor, it's one of the first desks you see. And it's just there as a reminder to people that that's what happens if you get overly stressed. It's what happens if you allow things to get on top of you. And they're using that in a way to encourage people to recognize stress, recognize they might need help. They too have put in place a very good mental health first aid network within the stock exchange. So I think that has been interesting. And other sectors, I think, are still lagging behind. I was, talking about my days in newspapers, and when the trade unions were very, very powerful in newspapers, we had this system called the chapel, so you had a mother of the chapel and a father of the chapel, and it wasn't a religious thing. It was just that's how it was sort of built. So the reporters would have a father of the chapel or a mother of the chapel, the photographers, the sports desk, the library, the messengers, and okay, that was about trade unions, and that was about what trade unions did. But I've actually worked since then with a number of organisations where they brought in that to have within each section somebody who is fulfilling that sort of role. And the good thing about that is it can be, you can have it in those days they were elected. They don't have to be elected, they can be chosen, or they could be elected, whatever you want. But they become the kind of go-to person in a situation where you don't necessarily automatically want to go to your boss or your line manager or human resources. And they can also, so like, for example, your colleague earlier who talked about, being trained in mental health first aid, they would get time off to go and get trained in mental health first aid. They would know about social prescribing. They would be the people that their colleagues trusted to go and talk to them. And then they would become a network. And they would support each other too. So that's just one idea of, that I've seen in practice that I think is very effective.